In my opinion, I think a lot of AI strategies tend to focus on the how rather than the why, right? So we're talking about sort of how do we bring these data sets together? How do we sort of ensure that there's no biases in our models and all of that? For me, what's really important is that we focus on the why. We focus on the business problem that we're looking to solve. And we think about, what is solving that business problem going to bring to the organization? And whether it's through AI, whether it's through automation, whether it's through ML, you probably don't want to go down the path of even solving that business problem unless it's really important and it's going to bring value for your stakeholders and your shareholders.
Welcome to Biotech Bytes. I'm your host, Steve Swan. Today we're wrapping up 2024, talking about 2025. I'm joined by 8 different CIOs with wide-ranging perspectives and opinions on where we are and where we're heading next year. Some of these faces and names you should probably be familiar with if you pay attention to our podcast. There might be some that are new. We'll do our best to keep things organized and moving along. I'm sure at some point, if we start talking over each other, we'll work it out. So I'll just do I'll run down everybody's name. And, everybody's name's already on the screen here, but, I'll just run down who's here right now. We have Eduard de Vries Sands. We have Ganesh Iyer. We've got Raj. Thank you, Raj. We have Shola Oyewole. We have Bill Pierce, James Schluter, Elisabeth Schwartz, and Bill Wallace. Thanks, everybody, for showing up today. So I had sent out some questions in the initial email that when I invited everybody. And I mentioned that I was going to probably just call on one person and let everybody dovetail off what their answer is to the question. And the first one I'm going to direct towards Bill Pierce. The first question that I had that I wrote down there in 2024, we talked a lot about AI on our podcast, right? And just wondering, in your opinion, has AI lived up to the hype? And how do you see it evolving in 2025?
An interesting question. I think it's whose hype, right? Are we trying to live up to? If it's the vendor hype, I'll just give you an example. I bought a golf driver with AI in it, and I don't hit like Bryson DeChambeau. So something's not working quite right. I think if you have realistic expectations to, sorting through the hype and understanding what's realistic, then you probably had a pretty good 2024. Stephen, if you remember your and my conversation, we talked about kind of AI foundations and being AI ready. And a lot of what my team did is preparing the executive team, and I had ELT level meetings on this, preparing the executives to what does it mean for us? What does AI mean? And what are our strongest opportunities? So things like getting more closer to our customer, doing some personalization, using the data that we have, forecasting. We made massive improvements in forecasting, anomaly detection. Some of the areas that maybe we didn't do quite as good as we wanted to is the predictive modeling that we did. But I think we had a pretty good year setting our foundation, right? Getting our data ready, right? So we did a whole data classification effort, making sure the cybersecurity was in place. We had a whole lot of data loss prevention and data detection and response setups and just encryption and the whole 9 yards. And then getting through AI policies, which was fun, right? Working with HR and getting an AI policy that the whole company could live with. And then eventually rolling that out into an AI roadmap. And what's our near-term opportunities? Things like chatbots or supply chain or some of these projects that we took on, and extend that eventually to what we ultimately want to do, right? In life sciences, you've got a compound, you've got some research, you really want to change the outcomes that happen in personalized medicine and the experiences of all human beings, right? So we're not forgetting that we're scientist-led and scientific by nature, but we just felt like some of our foundations for this year's hype, right, would be a little bit more realistic. So I think for BioIVT, anyway, my experiences, it has lived up to a lot of what it can do and can't do. And for 2025, I think some of our big things will be a heck of a lot more data, right? So we think that you may want to call it this, you may not, Internet of Things, big data collision with AI, and then just letting the models mature and tune, right? I think if we have realistic expectations about that, and we get out of the supply chain and some of the operational and then into some of the more scientific, right, biomarker detection and some of the really complex use cases as we've tuned these models and cleaned up our data, And then more important, Stephen, you and I talked about the last time we chatted. How do you make sure AI is compliant? How do you make sure you don't have this big risk going out? And I said something that maybe people may laugh at, but I still hold true to this today. And that is, we use our HR policies to drive how the AI is deployed. And what do I mean by that? We're doing a lot of testing to make sure that the AI is compliant so that it can't do things that a human, right, that an employee wouldn't be allowed to do, right? So if we heard about the chatbot that happened in a European shipping agency that told an off-color joke, right? We all know an employee on the phone that tells an off-color joke would be terminated probably on the spot, right? So you have to treat the AI as it starts to mature and become more mature and more operational and more integrated. You have to almost treat it like an employee. So we've done a lot on the testing and quality and compliance harness for AI. So 2024, big foundation year. 2025, excited to see what comes.
Very cool. Lots there. One of the things that you said at the very, very beginning when you were talking was something. It reminded me of a conversation that I had with Ganesh. Ganesh, when you were talking about the foundation of the education of really what AI is and what it can do, and educating your leaders, right? You and I talked a lot about that because you were kind of like, well, I got to figure out if they even know what they're talking about. Let's start there, right? Tell us about that.
We're doing something similar here at Harmony Biosciences. So Steve, thanks for having me here. For those who do not know me, my name is Ganesh Iyer, and I'm the CIO here at Harmony Biosciences. And we are doing something very similar to what Bill just talked about. 2024 is going to be that year of aligning, educating, and defining AI for us. It obviously, as Bill started off his conversation talking about the hype, whether it's the vendor's hype or whether it is truly something for us, right? We don't know if we really need AI at this point of time. So I'm going to go as blind as that, right? And what we're going to do is, one of the key things that we were discussing within the board as well was, how do we define governance more than anything, right? The first step for us is, we don't have a policy in place yet. So step one was for us to define a policy. And then along with that policy, have that policy ready, have a workshop with the business. Try to understand AI. Is it truly AI? Is it analytics? Or is it some form of automation that the business needs? Because the business also, AI is a mix of a lot of all these things. So trying to understand and align with the business, bring in a third-party company to explain all this, understand what Gen AI is, try to understand what a lot of these applications define as AI within their applications, because the business is pretty confused about that. Because we've implemented NetSuite, we've implemented Coupa, we've implemented Conga, we are big on TM1, and all these guys have inbuilt AI within their platforms as well. And a lot of all these companies are directly calling on the business leads. A lot of these guys are pretty confused about AI there. And then here I am, right, a technical guy going and talking to them about Gen AI, ChatGPT, talking about using Teams as our bot, right? So trying to kind of help them understand what these different concepts are very key. And for us, 2024 is going to be that year of trying to understand. And what we've done is, the other piece is for us to define a strategy for AI. And again, as a CIO, it's very easy for me to come and define a strategy, right? But is that strategy going to be something that the business is going to embrace, right? Is the big question. Instead of me trying to align with them once I define a strategy, my approach is slightly different. I want them to be part of defining that strategy. So part 2 of that workshop that we're planning on, and that's something that we're planning in February, because January is going to be pretty busy once people return back from the holidays. We want to define our strategy together as an organization. what is it? Do we really want to embark on AI, or do we provide you guys first with analytics? What is that going to be? And then based on that, define what our AI strategy is going to be. And then collectively take the AI policy, build a governance around it, and the strategy to the board, I think will make a lot of sense. And that's how we are approaching it. Hopefully I answered your leading question, Steve.
No, it's perfect. Thank you. And, I think part of your answer, I think, dovetails a little bit into some of the stuff that I think Edward and I talked about a little bit there too, right? Your approach, what you've done is really focused on the business, but then you've taken almost an individualized approach from the technology side, right?
I would agree. The way we look at it to enable our business. So we really feel we're part of our business. So one part is this guardrails. I think Bill and Ganesh, you talked about it. How do we make sure we have the right policies? We have the right counsel. We make sure that we do the right thing from a privacy and risk perspective. But the second part is, how do we work with our business unit leaders and together say, what could AI do in your business unit? How could we reimagine how we want the business to look, a year, 3 years, and 5 years from now? And what does that mean for our margin and for our revenue? And once you start to map that out at a business unit level together, you end up with, I would say, almost a strategy per business unit, and we then roll that up. Because I don't have the idea that, within IT, I can decide this is the right strategy for the enterprise. We do it at a business unit level, but it's interesting. Once you start to inventory and share the repository of things we're doing per business unit, how many things are applicable to multiple business units? So we're really trying to create the demand, and IT is there then to help fulfill the demand. The other approach we looked at originally is like, well, what if we do it all? But then I'm kind of pushing it into my business. That's not going to work. I need my business leaders to see how is this going to help my margin? And at the same time, in our markets, how do we see the market changing? How do we see the available margin for the whole industry? How is that going to shift when AI gets deployed at scale? Because I would like to be at a better part where I get a larger share of the margin versus my competitors. So I think it's a fairly strategic per market approach. And then we try to roll up on what does that mean at an enterprise level.
So overall, we're all getting involved with AI, right? And I think what I'm hearing anyway is it's a let's wait and see, and let's just keep the continuum going as to where we were in 24.
Oh yes, it's AI is evolving constantly, so we have to see how that path meanders, control that path. Talking about guardrails, that's necessary. We talk about compliance. I know that the FDA is setting up guidelines on medical devices with the self-corrective side of the medical device to ensure that there's trustworthiness in the process that's following, and you build confidence in the technology. So trying to pull what everyone's talking about is we need to manage expectations, we need to educate, and we need to build trust and make sure that we're following the right path. Take small bites, not big chunks.
Right. And we all talked about that, right? To get there, I think, and I had this conversation with a lot of you, the data, right? I remember Raj and I talked about that quite a bit, right? We talked about the data coming into this AI is something that we've got to, first of all, we got to figure out and make sure we got the right data in the right shape. But second of all, are we using the right data? And is there more that we can do with some of the data that's out there that we don't have? Like Raj, you and I hit on the EMR and EHR data at some point, right? You were like, we should be squeezing more of the juice out of that data. So in 25, do you think that's something that we're going to be pushing for? Or tell me what your thoughts are there, Raj.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, from my perspective, there is a lot of focus on sort of acquiring new data, but I strongly believe that a lot of the data that we need sort of already exists. And I think the EHR, EMR example that we've been talking about, where, there's a lot of unstructured data that exists in EHR and EMR systems, let's say. I think these are doctors' notes, these are HCP notes, let's say. And now you're starting to see sort of, using natural language processing, using AI, the conversion of those unstructured data sets to structured data sets, which could then inform a wide variety of use cases in the pharma and biotech industry, right? Think about safety monitoring, think about patient recruitment, think about, some of the other use cases around drug discovery and drug development, just sort of real world evidence data sets that we've all been, using over the past few years, right? Yeah. So for me, I think we first got to look at some of the data sets that already exist and sort of think about how we could squeeze more juice out of those data sets. I totally agree with that. I think the other thing, and I think we started to sort of talk about this, is that, look, we have biases in our data sets today, right? And we've been training some of these data models, or we've been training a lot of these AI models, let's say, without thinking about some of the biases, without putting a lot of emphasis around some of the biases, right? We all work for companies that are involved in clinical trials, and how do you, when you think about running a clinical trial, how do you make sure that the clinical trials that you run think about a wide variety of sort of, patient population sets, right? So when you think about data, you got to think about those biases as well. And for me, I think it's really important that we start to incorporate thinking about biases into how we prep some of these training data sets, for building our AI models. Yeah. So I think data biases and then squeezing the most juice out of existing data sets would be two of the things that I'm thinking about.
How do you think, eliminating or trying to limit those biases? I think Bill Pierce talked a little bit about it, I think, right? But I mean, what do we do? How do we do that? Where do we go? I don't know how to, is it just training the models? Is it our data? Is it a combination of the two? I don't know. Does anybody have anything on that?
I think that as the different business areas, we started the year educating a lot of them on AI and the new aspects of AI, because there are certain large language models are relatively recent, and that's what has led to a lot of the AI hype. But there's been machine learning and other types of AI now for almost two or so decades. So I think there was a lot of education. And at the beginning, I think it was, as people didn't fully understand, they just thought it was, okay, let's take this model and throw it against the data. But when they start to recognize that you can have hallucinations, when they start to recognize that it isn't so much artificial intelligence as it's pulling things together that it can find relationships with, that has led to a number of conversations about, do we put, for a given business use case, do we put the data from several different sources in a specific area so the AI can't accidentally go out and go to somewhere else and pull something in? You don't want some large data area where someone doing something on the clinical side could accidentally have their AI pull in something on the marketing side and vice versa. And so a lot of this year, I think, has been people starting to understand what are the aspects of AI that they need to think about as they think about the business use cases they're looking for. And yes, there's a lot of pulling data together and certain metadata and different things that are done so that the AI functions in the way that they want. But it's also about taking a new look. People have been used to data in different areas, in a lot of ways, sort of silos. And if you want to integrate it into an analytics environment, you have to do a lot of work and et cetera. And they initially looked at it and said, oh, AI can do all this for me. But I think there's been a recognition that we need to be careful about what data we let an AI model go against as we determine what's the specific business use case we're trying to solve for.
Steve, that's why I talked a little bit about that data classification, right? So by partitioning your data, by classifying your data, exactly what Bill was talking about can be managed pretty tightly, because I 1,000% agree with him. You really don't want some marketing data to kind of spill into that clinical data and then that data be analyzed as just, the source of truth, right? That really you'd have something that had undue influence. I also talked about that testing. I'll give you a little bit more on the testing side. As he said, math is math, right? A lot has been around a long time. So there's kind of Bayesian and quadratic programming algorithms, not to put too much nerdy stuff on there, but it can find bias and actually help you tune the bias over time. So even though your company may produce the bias data, again, there's mathematical techniques when you start tuning your model. You look at that anomalies and outliers detection. Right? You might start with patient safety and say, look at this, here's the normal distribution and here's these outliers. Let's really dig in. And you really use that to start looking at where you might have bias or where you might have errors in your data. And that's why it takes a little bit of time to tune these models. And the discussion I had at DLT is this may take us 6 to 18 months to mature, right? Before we're comfortable with this going outward. Now, I worry more probably about the inward data coming in because we did such a big data classification. So if I just open up ChatGPT and let it pull in everything, that's very dangerous. So we've done a lot to wrap ChatGPT and what it pulls in, and then what it goes out is really highly restricted, right? Pretty much from us, nothing goes outward. So again, I think there's a lot of caution that the different leadership teams have to take when they start managing this data.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to, I think, a point that Bill Wallace made, and I think I think this is important, and I just want to make sure this is not lost on us, right? So, in my opinion, I think a lot of AI strategies tend to focus on the how rather than the why, right? So we're talking about sort of how do we, bring these data sets together? How do we sort of ensure that there's no biases in our models and all of that? And I'm an engineer. I've been enamored with sort of technology and all the sexy AI tools that are out there. But I think for me, what's really important is that we focus on the why, right? We focus on the business problem that we're looking to solve, and we think about what is that business problem, what is solving that business problem going to bring to the organization? And unless it's really going to bring significant value to the organization, whether it's through AI, whether it's through automation, whether it's through ML, you probably don't want to go down the path of even solving that business problem unless it's really important and it's going to bring value for your stakeholders and your shareholders, let's say, right? So, I think it's really important that you focus on the why versus focusing on the how, or at least that's where you have to start, in my opinion.
And I think this is in line with what we've done in IT as well over the last couple of years. How do we become outcome driven? We're trying to steer towards an outcome and not say, hey, these are the tools we have available. I think if you think where healthcare could go, you would hope eventually that we will get reimbursed for the outcomes, our medications and our treatments create. So what we're doing right now should set us up to get there. And that will then drive us to how do we want the market to look in a couple of years? And how can this specific effort we're doing help us to get us to where we want to be? So I fully agree.
I think being outcome driven like that, Edward, I think dovetails into something that I think you take it all the way back to the root, right? With the people that you hire and how you bring them up to speed. And Shola, I want to tap you on the shoulder here because I want to kind of share with folks the way that you approach your group and your technology and how you keep folks curious and experimenting in the right direction. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to join everybody in today's call. I run digital innovation at United Therapeutics, and I was CIO for the first 19 years. But for the last 7, I've just focused on enabling new technologies into the company. And I do this by encouraging a lot of experimentation. I'm sure you all can remember the last few years, big words like big data, voice over IP, cloud. There's always a new fangled toy or tool that the media or whomever brings to our attention. And everybody runs around trying to be, big data ready or cloud ready or whatever. AI was invented in 1940 by Turing, okay? He came up with the concept of a machine that can do all kinds of things. We've had AI with us now for 84 years. All of a sudden, they give it a new name, Generative AI. That sounds cool. But I tell you, the value I've gotten from it so far, very, very useful. It's like, do you remember Microsoft's Clippy, that little smart little clip they used to do? Yeah. Well, so that is what generative AI can do for us today from a desktop point of view. You can also use it for research. The reluctance to use it in R&D or in anything to do with drug development is the unpredictability. And it is hard for me to convince compliance, legal, or quality that the results of a generative AI session can be predictable and consistent. It is hard to prove where this machine got its answers from, even if it's from a corpus of data you fed it, you trained it on. Until we reach a point where we can truly understand where it gets its information from, it'll be hard for us to incorporate generative AI in drug development. I think for research, it is super helpful. But to actually get FDA clearance on a device, maybe a software as a medical device with built-in generative AI, I think we're a little ways from there. I do a lot of experimentation here. I do a lot of proofs of concept at United Therapeutics, very small scale. But what we've done is to formalize this, we've built a data governance group. We want to first understand what data we own, what we have, and what kind of information we think we're going to need down the road. And I am now building an AI center of excellence where we'll have business owners, data owners, and more importantly, a group that will help vet problems the business is trying to solve. To me, generative AI is just another tool. And the question is, can this tool be useful? And can this tool help us make better drugs, faster drugs, or even improve the quality of life of our patients? Every experiment that I run has to come up with answers like that. How does it help my patient? How much faster can we get a drug to market? And if I could quote the Gartner, hype cycle, I think we've reached the point of the trough of what's the word again? Trough of disillusionment. We thought it could do so much. I mean, we're all, you have people that have titles like Chief AI Officer. I'm like, why? There's no Chief Electrical Officer today. Electricity is a tool. Why would you go change your title to be Chief AI Officer? What does that mean? So I think we should give ourselves some time. Let this mature a little bit. Let's keep experimenting. Let's keep playing with it, of course. But I think the jury is still out. The business is looking at us and saying, how do we make money with this? And I don't have the right answer yet. So that's where I am on this, Steve.
I think everybody's still trying to figure out how to make money with it, right?
Well,
yeah, Steve, it's not an easy button that you hit on a desk, so it takes some time.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things is we've looked at business use cases. What is the ROI? What is the benefit that AI can bring to a process versus the level of effort? I had a conversation with one of the business areas, and they were talking about, well, if I ask this AI things, I sometimes get answers like I hired an intern out of college and I asked them to do some research, and I said, well, AI is going to give you answers, but you do need to make sure that it is the answers that you're looking for. And we had a long conversation, and part of it was, look, if I use that analogy, then it costs you something to have an intern for the summer. It also costs you something in the compute and in bringing the data together and in building metadata for that data so that the AI can run. And you need to make sure that as we look at this solution, it isn't going to be something where it's the cost of 5 interns instead of 1. And I also talk, and the business is starting to understand, as we've worked with them a bit, is that sort of as Shola was just saying, it's going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint, and that's, I think, part of where this hype cycle has been, and it's gotten to the trough of disillusionment because some of the consulting companies that were coming in and talking to the business earlier this year were promising a lot and being very vague on what it would take to get there. And we've come to a point where we're a little bit more focused on those business outcomes and are able to more realistically do some estimates of what it's going to take to get there. And there is, I think, an emerging understanding with a lot of our business partners that first, it is a true collaboration between technology and business, as we always look for when we're trying to improve these business processes. Because it's emerging, it's so much more important that we're all aligned. And at the same time, it's not necessarily going to give you everything you wanted right out of the gate, and that there does need to be an understanding that it's going to take a while to get to the ultimate endpoint they're looking for.
I think, Bill, if I can just build on your point, one of the things that, and I read this interesting sort of article over the weekend, happy to share it with everyone. It talks about this sort of distinction that I think we're still getting our hands around, which is, generative AI tools like ChatGPT shouldn't be thought of as as a search engine. It should be thought of as a dialogue engine, right? And I think that was a big aha moment for me, where you shouldn't be sort of giving it a query and then expecting it to sort of come back with an accurate answer. I think you have to start to have a dialogue with it, right? You have to continue to sort of engineer that prompt and continue to refine that prompt before you get sort of input that's going to be valid for you, right? And I think that's the paradigm shift that I think a lot of us are wrestling with, which is sort of not thinking of it as a search engine and thinking of it as more of a dialogue engine. And I think as soon as we get our arms around that, I think we're going to start to see more value coming out of some of these generative AI tools.
It sounds like the sales cycle, right? The hype cycle got ahead of us, right? We got out over our skis. But how do we handle the governance of this? I mean, right? The board's got to be thinking about this. They don't have a choice, right? I mean, is that on us? Is that on IT to think about the governance of this? Are we part of that? Are we part of the problem, part of the solution?
And actually, my board's pushed us to be progressive in this space, but it's been a very cautious progression, right? So what's proven, right? Back to this has been around for some of these machine learning in particular models have been around for a long time. What's proven, right? And I think we've made some really good success with what's proven. And that's why I said for things like personalization of our services or things like forecasting, we've made massive steps forward, right? We used to miss some of our forecasts by a few $1,000,000. Now we're almost down to the dollar in many cases, right? So some things have worked really well. Anomaly detection, surprising enough, go back to the Rogers search engine. I mean, I actually found, if you're willing to learn, right, the search and the anomaly for trained people, right, actually helps you to understand your data and explore your data before you start opening it up to the world, right? So the data scientists actually tend to do a pretty good job. And when you're trying to do like supply chain optimization, they can run a lot of anomaly detection and where really is the supply chain broken, and then start to focus with the business on what the attack techniques are for fixing that issue, right? So we've had massive success there as well from our customer service and our supply depots and things of that nature. Where we haven't had the success, because it's a hell of a lot more complex, and this is back to Shola's comment, we can search a biomarker and we can get back 650,000 hits on that biomarker. What do you do with that, right? There's a lot of data coming back at you. So how we're controlling that problem set in that domain, right, is back to the scientist and having really good ontologies and taxonomies and controlled data sets, right? I don't have anywhere in the company open ChatGPT. I have nothing where it's open to the internet. I've either ring fenced it in Island browser. I've ring fenced it with Microsoft, right? I've just done so much ring fencing. It's actually very constrained, and it's partially because, hey, let's experiment. Let's go as fast as we are comfortable, but let's also not have the big misstep that we've seen a lot of people have. And I think it was Netflix who used a whole bunch of images or video content that they shouldn't use, right? It went out and found it and brought it back in, and then they had the big, reset, right? Oh, we made a big mistake. Well, imagine doing that not in a media company, but a life sciences company, that could be the end of you.
Well, so I mean, what we've done here is IT rolled out an AI policy. Legal and IT are very aligned, and HR, and we've leaned towards a lot of education because we know that eventually each person is going to have some kind of access to a large language model from their mobile device, from their home computers, etc. Just like the Google search, right? Eventually, it's going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere. Even my Meta glasses has some version of AI in it. So it will be really impossible to prevent people from using this. So what we've done is we've focused on educating them and saying, okay, these are the guardrails, right? Proprietary data is proprietary information. You cannot share that in any LLM system. This is what it looks like, all right? Any results you get from an LLM system, you should validate. You should already be some kind of subject matter expert in it. If you're going to use it as any information you are going to publish, you must cite your sources. So there are multiple layers, and I think the best thing for any employee is education, experimentation, and through experimentation, further education. Shutting everything down, which was our initial strategy in this company. I don't run IT anymore, but shutting everything down was only as good for a short period of time until we noticed there were LLMs all over the place. So I think right now, education first, lots of experimentation, and after we've built our center of excellence, we can now begin to focus on value-driven applications that generative AI could help us with.
Yeah, one thing that we've done, there's individual productivity AI, i.e., your Copilots, your ChatGPTs, and in addition to the education that we did earlier in the year, we also did in a limited fashion, roll out individual productivity. In our case, we're Office 365. We primarily did it through Copilot. And we basically went to all the managers and said, hey, find out if anybody on your team would like to use AI for their individual productivity. And we can, again, going through compliance and legal, we can turn it on for them, but we do need your approval. And so I would say right now we have about 10% of the organization that is using AI, and we actually have sessions about every 3 to 4 weeks where we just get that group together, whoever can attend. What have you been using it for? Lessons learned. And there really has been a gain in understanding, and not so coincidentally, a lot of those individuals that are interested on an individual level are involved in the conversations we're having on the business aspects that we could do for getting better efficiency. And Ganesh was mentioning it before, right? AI is starting to come in all these different software as a service solutions, and so we want to make sure that everybody, as Raj was saying, right, understand it's a dialogue engine. It's not necessarily a search engine. And as they're working with the individual productivity, it really has helped to open up to them what it can, what it cannot do, and what it does better. And that actually has changed what some of the conversations are in terms of business processes that can benefit from AI. And I do think that the more that our business partners and colleagues get used to AI and see how it works in a controlled fashion. I mean, one of the reasons we did Copilot is because we can keep it just to our data, just to the data that a specific individual has access to within the 365 ecosystem. But that kind of self-education as well as self-production, efficiencies has helped our conversation as they've gotten more familiar with it.
Bill, I want to second what you just said. When I started turning on the data loss prevention and really monitoring AI usage, I was horrified what I saw, and maybe this is what Shola is talking about. But you can't just shut it off, right? If you shut it off, you'll become kind of Big Brother in the evil empire. But I used the data to start educating people. So when somebody was screenshotting GDPR data, I would just contact them and say, why? What are you doing that for? When somebody was, Gmailing something, I'd be, why? What are you doing that for? And then we gave them, just like you did, we said, okay, this Copilot, this is safe. Or, hey, this ChatGPT we wrapped in the Island browser, this is safe. Can you please go here? Because a lot of what the use cases were kind of ironic and maybe infantile, which is just editing. People are sending content through, and I had somebody send a board deck through to edit it. Right. I'm like, okay. And open ChatGPT, send out my board deck to the world. Right. And so you kind of chuckle, but you're mortified at the same time. We've done a lot. I have 3 layers of data loss and data detection and response systems. And we just put a lot of energy in that and educating technology then to educate the business of, hey, why are you doing that? And ask really good questions. Now we're putting a library out there and the tools out there that we say, per our AA policy, these are safe. Knock yourself out here, right? You can do a lot here that's very safe for the company.
So we've taken a kind of a different approach in that we've gone completely by use case and by what the business needs. It's not the technology-driven process. It is a business use process. So we actually have discrete applications that we use per business area. And they're pretty basic. They're not really generative. It's much more auditing or things like that. And we've been very open with our users that they cannot put things into ChatGPT because it'll get out. They should not use it, that it is not a closed system, that anything they put in potentially be released. So from that perspective, we just have very discrete uses, and we're not really using generative AI yet, and I haven't seen a use case for that.
Elisabeth, something my CEO did, which was extremely helpful, is in our strategy sessions, talking about the strategy and the use cases and where he sees this going and where he sees, but also educating the LT. It wasn't me educating. He brought up kind of some cybersecurity breaches where data leaked, and a competitor of ours had a $75 million hit, right? Just educating at the C-suite is really helpful, right? To when it comes from the top down, you'll find that people tend to listen a little bit more than if it's just IT. You have a cybersecurity analyst just saying, hey, don't do that. It's much better coming from the top.
Is the one place that we are using AI is on our security. Our SOC is basically all AI. We use a program that does it.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And what we've seen is that our CEO as a sponsor works really well because when he pushes the business units, you get more of a reaction, obviously, than, when IT does it. And he has that fine line between, hey, we've got to grab these opportunities, find these opportunities. Otherwise, we're not going to be market leading. But at the same time, let's protect the downside. And for example, he went a day to MIT, a course like how do CIOs handle AI? And that was an eye opener because after that, we infused it into many more of our conversations. Is the real payoff there? I think it's starting, but I do feel we're ahead of the market. And to me, that's important because that's where we want to stay, while we also manage the risk and make sure we don't, like you've all said, like Elisabeth said, we don't take risks with client data, we don't commingle data and things like that. It's a balanced approach.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the points of education has been, and even a point of learning has been, is that the traditional ROI model is only one of the ways in which you could measure the value of an AI-driven use case. Let's say, I have sort of 2 other frameworks that I sort of think about. I think one is around, the ROE model, which is the return on the employee. So when you think about tools like Microsoft Copilot, for instance, it actually does not have positive ROI in sort of the traditional sense, but it has positive ROE or return on the employee because it's actually helping the employee not work on sort of commodity tasks and get them to work on more sort of value added tasks. And I think of that as a return on employee versus a return on investment. And then there's another part of it, which is sort of return on the future. If you think about use cases like drug discovery and drug development, Shola, you were mentioning some of those use cases. Those actually don't have immediate return on investment. They have return on the future because you have to invest in them for sort of 3 to 5 years, let's say, and it's going to give you a competitive advantage in the future, right? So part of the education has been, how do you get your executive team to understand that it's not only ROI, but it's ROE and ROF as well. And I think that changes sort of the financial dialogue as well with your executive team.
I totally agree to that. There is no ROI the way I see AI. It's all about efficiency. How can you improve what you're doing? And the other thing that we've also made sure that we talk, at least to the leaders, is AI does not mean reduction in jobs. A very clear message that needs to go out, right? Because a lot of people have this myth that you bring in AI, we're going to lose our job, right? I think the approach has to be AI is going to help you do your job better, right? But again, I've been listening to all of you, all great points, right? But we kind of see a lot of other challenges. One of the thing is that, and Steve, you and I have talked about this a couple of times, right? We've grown too big, too fast. 3 years ago, we were a $180 million company. Today, we are close to 800 million. 3 years. We're planning to be $1 billion in another year, right? Our problems are different. We were not digital. So in the 3 years, we implemented close to 47 applications, right? Now, we're trying to digitize a lot of our processes. The business is still not ready. And then here we have AI, right? And everybody wants AI, but you're not digital completely. Your processes are not integrated. We do a lot of manual integration. I do fat fingering. Case in point here is between my contracting application and my procurement application, I manually enter the vendors in two applications, same vendor, right? So when I do things still which are very rudimentary, right, and very elementary, the way I look at it, AI is something that we're only focusing on certain parts of the process. We are still not looking at AI holistically. Drug development process, we can do a lot of things there. But again, are we ready for that? We're not, right? So for us, learning what we actually need and what I call the fit for purpose solution for Harmony is something that we're very, very focused about. It's not about AI just because AI is there in the market. And the fact that I, as a CIO, want to put it in my resume, or somebody else wants to put it in their resume, saying that we've done AI, and you're ready for the next job. And I'm being very candid here, right? But it is about trying to understand what it is that we need. And if we truly need it, because now a lot of boards are also pushing AI. 3 months ago, my boss, the CEO, didn't even think that AI was something that we needed to talk or discuss about. Now, suddenly he comes and says, oh, Ganesh, we need to get AI. Everybody needs to be aligned. We need a strategy. The board needs a governance. All of a sudden, right? But the way we think, and when I say we, I've already aligned with a lot of business leaders, and we all collectively think is, yes, the board is pushing. And for us to be able to answer the board, we need to be aligned and understand what AI truly means for us. And it may be a roadmap for all that we talk. And the roadmap could be 2026 is when we start looking at AI.
So Ganesh, when I was in a similar situation, right? 16 mergers and acquisitions, and you end up with a lot of operational complexity, right? And when I mentioned the forecasting growth that we've had, it was exactly to the point of, right, multiple ERP systems, multiple operational, all disparate data. And by putting that in the data lake and then putting AI on top of it, we actually got to a high level precision. So by playing that back to the CEO and CFO, who were highly skeptical, by the way, that investment would pay off the way it has. And now for the board to watch that investment pay off, and for the CEO and CFO, I don't have a justification issue anymore. Now it's, okay, what are the business unit leaders? What's the true business problems that we're trying to solve, right? And have them bring the problems up from a strategic perspective. And I can say, again, in our strategic planning, why I mentioned to Steve at the beginning, why I'm excited for 2025, out of our top 3 initiatives, 2 of them have AI as a core component of them. Whether we can be successful or not, right, remains to be seen, right? We've got to go through that learning curve and that development curve. But it's going to be exciting to see a business unit leader lead a whole, transformational new product capability that actually will be IP for us as well. So it's, again, I'm pretty excited for where we can go with this if we understand where the focus is, right? And I think that's the hard part, particularly for a company, heavy growth, heavy M&A, right? Because there's too many problems to attack, right? You got to really focus.
It can make scaling easier. I think that's what you just described, because we all did integration in the past, but now how do we scale and get some of the leverage we want to get without constantly doing the full integration, because the value is not always there, as I think we've all learned over the years. And AI can be a tool in the toolkit to achieve that. And you're all right, it's never the goal, but it can be a valuable tool.
Yep. And does the board want to see or hear the failures? Maybe not, right? That's been an interesting dialogue for us, right? It's like, don't do it if it's going to fail. Well, actually, the failure may be more educational for us than anything else, right? So I think, Shola probably could give us lots of, failures they said that was very educational for them from an innovation perspective.
Well, so I've been working with CleanUp's medical affairs team to help draft a clinical trial protocol where we're going to leverage artificial intelligence to help diagnose a disease. Now, that is not generative AI. That is more, I guess, machine learning type AI, where it is going to analyze a patient, structure physiology, and try to predict a disease. Now, that is regulated, that is controlled, that is software as a medical device, that is a qualified and validated system. That is a practical application of artificial intelligence, but it is controlled. It is not generative AI. It's a clinical trial, and we're going to test this product to see, is it as good or better than the real thing, the gold standard, as it's called. And with successes like that, that brings business value, because what you're proposing is, can I use software to diagnose a patient's disease, which is non-invasive, which is faster and better than today's standard of care, which is running a catheter up the patient's heart to detect the pressure in the heart. Instead of doing that, can we do this digitally? So there's a clear business value for that. And if we can find more of those, I think that will encourage management or the business to look more into AI as a tool to help advance the business needs. So this is a first for us, and I find it very exciting.
I would bring, I would build on your point. I think business value, absolutely, you have to start with the why. You have to think about the use case and the business problem. But I think for me, the other question you have to ask yourself is, are you culturally ready as an organization to sort of transform with the use of AI or not? And I think if the cultural element is not there, you can forget about AI. I think the first focus that you need to spend on is making sure that you have the right cultural DNA to actually move AI initiatives forward. And if you don't, I think you become a chief cultural officer and focus on that before you focus on being a CIO or a CAIO.
I couldn't agree more. If your chief medical officer, chief scientific officer doesn't support that initiative you have going on there, even though you might have done feasibility and patient recruitment, even though you might have done safety and pharmacovigilance, and now you're putting it together more holistically, if they're not ready for that, that's going to be a huge barrier, right? I think it has to be discussed at the executive level.
And that's why I lead through education awareness, right? I let folks that are actually going to do this work, I expose them to this experimentation. I have a pilot group. It is voluntary. People join, and it's a co-pilot pilot group. So the first exposure is to co-pilot, which sits in my enterprise. So they can play safely. It's a very safe sandbox for them to play with. And they use it as probably, as you would call it, I wrote it here, you said it's a dialogue engine. So the initial reaction is to use it as a dialogue engine and to help them with their day-to-day editing of documents and all that. That is to breed confidence and comfort with this. The next stage would be, okay, what aspects of your business can we leverage generative AI in? We have a librarian service here where we have a group of people that answer queries to our drugs, diseases, patients, etc. And they have to respond to each query with a custom personalized email. Well, this is a great use case for a generative AI tool. And I set up a private LLM for them that trained on their data. Okay. And every time a request came in, we'd cut and paste that request into their prompt, and it will provide a personalized response, and it will include its sources. So you could just email that whole response to the patient or to the doctor because it cites the sources, it provides the correct and accurate answer. But again, I tell people that you've got to be a subject matter expert in order to use generative AI so that you can tell when it is beginning to hallucinate. Job of generative AI is to please you. You are the master. They will do their best to impress you. They will do their best. They will make things up just to make you happy because that is their job. They were designed to please you. Think of an intern you hired. They're never going to say, no, I can't do this. They're going to try to figure it out. And that's what generative AI is, You sit down long enough, you prompt it about a disease. Before you know it, it starts going to places it shouldn't go to. You're like, wait, we started with A, you ended up with Z. There's no relationship. And then when you tell it, it apologizes. And then it starts again. So I always tell people you've got to be a subject matter expert in anything you are learning or trying to quote when you are interacting with the dialogue. Training, experimentation, education, repeat, repeat, repeat.
So Raj, we talked about, the mind shift from ROI to ROE, right? And when we're talking about AI, you were talking about the organization, how the organization has to be ready. Is that how you get them ready to make that mind shift in them, in whoever's making the calls, right? The ultimate calls from ROI to ROE, return on employee as opposed to return on investment? Is that part of it?
So Steve, I think that's part of it, but I think the other part of it is to understand what your current culture sort of looks like, and then what cultural barriers you might face to get ready for AI, right? I mean, how is decision making happening at the organization? How empowered are the employees in your organization? There's so many things that you have to think about. Do you have a fail fast or fail forward type of culture? Because I think part of what Shola mentioned is you're not going to succeed with every pilot, every experiment that you run, right? And is the organization willing to reward individuals that are taking that risk, or are they going to shut those experiments down because they're destined to fail, let's say? So I think you have to assess what the cultural context of the organization is and any potential sort of tweaks you have to make to the culture, and then you start to sort of think about how do you make those tweaks to the culture to sort of be AI ready, as an organization. Because I think without the right culture, I'm not quite sure you're going to succeed.
A year ago or so, we were talking, and I mean, the use case were real limited. I mean, that people were really using AI for, right? It sounds like now, after talking with everybody and hearing all this, there's more than a handful, right, of different use cases folks are using AI for. So in the span of a year, right, because we're reviewing 24 and moving into 25, we've jumped quite a bit, and changing that culture and doing things like Shola was talking about, I guess, has led us to where we are, right?
Steve, a lot of these have been proven, right? So again, machine learning, computational biology, preclinical space has been proven for a long time, right? They published papers and outcomes, right, using that machine learning techniques and mostly, right, for a long time. It's what's the culture to take that from the preclinical out to the clinical and then eventually out to the real world, right? And I think that's what Raj is trying to describe, right? Like every organization is going to have its unique combination of culture and people and experiences. And I think that the team, I don't see this as a CIO's job, by the way. I think the team, the executive team's job is to come together and have a hard dialogue about that. And again, what I try to do is make sure it's team based. Even when I have to, I guess, let go, I've had several occasions where I have an executive that's going to run with something that I'm afraid they're going to do some damage with. I just kind of watch and hold my tongue and try to facilitate as much as I can.
Bill, I mean, I'd say this is a tool that it is a business tool, but it is a business tool best understood by leaders like yourselves. So for that reason, you will have to lead that conversation with the executives. The executives, when they're having their morning coffee, it's on the newspapers everywhere. And there's going to be this FOMO. There's no understanding of what this is. They're thinking, does this mean we have to replace people? Does this replace my job? Does this make us do better things? So as a CIO or as a leader of sorts, right, I think we've got to grab the bull by the horns and help guide these leaders in the right direction. Explain what this is to them. Education. Make them comfortable. You're very right about the culture. However, some cultures are baked in fear of the unknown, fear of technology, fear of losing jobs, right? The way you allay that is through a lot of experimentation, a lot of testing. And so listen, give them a little sandbox, give them a proof of concept. They can't do wrong. They cannot destroy anything. The whole point is to build that comfort. And there are different levels of comfort for people. For us, we love our jobs because we love dealing with stuff like this. But there are folks that don't do what we do. They're going to be super uncomfortable. And I think the way I help them be comfortable is encourage them to do a lot of experimentation, including the executives.
I think that's fair. And partly is also figuring out in the culture what excites people, what excites your board, what excites your executive team, what gets your employees fired up. So is it commercial success? Is it if we are able to take a rare disease and really find 20% more patients so we can help them improve their lives? And do we then tell that story and then link it to, well, and we've been able to do that because we had better patient segmentation, then we did personalization, and that's how we found these patients who were able to help them on therapy. Put the breadcrumbs really close and celebrate it together. As an executive team, we decide what's in the town hall. We decide, what messages we share to a larger audience. And with that, we also continuously influence the culture. So I think culture is an input, but then we should say, where do we want the culture to be, and keep tinkering to get it there slowly with every single action we take. And we make mistakes, let's be honest. But as long as we together say, what is the culture we want? What is the outcome again we want? We can connect the dots and we can get our entire employee base there.
I agree. I've had more success commercialization, operational than pure research, right? And it's probably, again, some of the compliance and other fear factors, as was alluded to earlier. But again, having those wins has really helped the team to be a lot more comfortable moving forward.
And we have to do that today. We have to, in our field, we have to stand apart. When our drug goes to the provider, to the doctor, because there's often many of them in a crowded market, there's loss of exclusivity. How do we make sure that our therapies stand out and that they can help the patients? Because if we don't do the commercialization right, we can have the best therapy in the world. It's not going to make the impact in the lives we care about. So I think that's something we shouldn't underestimate. And if you look even outside the pharmaceutical industry, AI on a sales force effectiveness has major impact. Whether you look, even at retail, you look at travel sector. So how can we take some of those approaches which are successful in other industries and apply them to ours? Because we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Let's be smart about it and then run a tool with compliance. How do we make sure we do the right thing for the patients, for the physicians, and for the market, and pick the ones we can and drive them really hard?
Absolutely. And, Shola was talking about the training and the experimentation. Raj talked about corporate culture and how that gets integrated into how people approach these AI projects. And I thought, Bill, your comment about when you see some of the business leaders and you think that they're kind of going down a maybe not the best path, but sometimes they just need to learn for themselves. One of the things that we had, in part of our training, that when we were educating the organization on AI and the different types, et cetera, one of the things that we had to deal with, we wanted to make sure we dealt with, was the idea of how you work with your consultants and the business partners, and that really comes down to, I said for a lot of time, data is like water; it flows to the area of least resistance. And when you have concerns, okay, am I going to be seen as failing if this doesn't work out? When you maybe haven't done a lot of experimentation as a business person, but now you get a consultant coming in and saying, "Oh, we've got the greatest AI since sliced bread, and we've got something that we can do for you." It can be a little bit, and again, we had a policy about you need to get any AI usage approved through IT and compliance, but there's always that possibility that someone thinks, oh, well, there's just this consultant, they know what they're doing and they can kind of help us on the side. And myself and one of my team members, this goes back now almost 2 years, but we were messing around with ChatGPT, the online version, not using any of our corporate data. This literally was non-corporate devices. We were just messing around with ChatGPT, and we asked a bunch of questions, got a bunch of responses, and of course, we all know you can go in and look and see how those answers were gotten. Well, we asked some very specific questions about some of the disease states that we are researching, and we got some very specific answers. We went into ChatGPT and we took some screenshots of where that information came from, and it quickly became apparent that there was another pharma company that had what we considered to most likely be proprietary information that was available out on the web with ChatGPT, because probably someone over there had been doing their own experimenting and perhaps didn't realize what it meant. And I then, thankfully, I actually knew the head of technology there in my network and sent them the information outside of the corporate network, and they thanked me very much. And it turned out that apparently one of their consultants had some conversation with somebody and then took data that shouldn't have gotten out and made it on the public web. But we took that story and we covered up a lot. We covered up enough stuff so that when we show that in our education, you can't see the specifics. But that, I think, was very helpful and very sobering, because it's one thing to say, hey, we don't want that stuff out there. it's another thing to realize that if you give proprietary data to one of your consultant groups because you think that they can do something for you on the side, and that if there's a failure, well, you can always blame the consultants, and you don't have to take the risk yourself. All of a sudden, to realize that that could really go south very quickly if they are not completely compliant in how they utilize and what they utilize. It went a long way in helping, I think, to get everyone on board with the fact that we do need to think first about making sure that the data does not flow like water into the wrong place.
I think in the last 6 months, Bill, and I don't know if you're seeing this, but I had similar experience. I was at a CIO conference, two CIOs talking, and the other one told the other one their IP was exposed. And when you hear that, it scares you to death, right? But in my last probably 3 months of conversations, I've had both Salesforce and Microsoft come to me and tell me how they're going to protect my data. Right? They don't even wait for me to ask, right? They come in and say, here's our solution, and here's how we've protected your data, and here's how we thought about it, and here's how. And do you want to talk to a technical architect to go through the details? So I do see the conversation changing a little bit, and it's maturing a little bit. And I'm hopeful that it won't be pervasive across all professional services and contractors, but I'm hoping, at least for our vendors, it becomes kind of a mandate for them to work with us.
The best part about that whole thing that I just described was we found out that there wasn't a consultant for us who had taken our data and put it in a place they shouldn't have.
We're getting down to the wire here, folks. I think we hit on AI quite a bit. I had a few other things I wanted to chat about, but I only had us reserved till getting close to 1 o'clock. So I want to ask everybody a question. I know that lots of you were on my podcast. I asked a music question at the end. This isn't going to be a music question, so don't worry about that. But what I wanted to ask each and every one of you, again, on a lighter subject, we're talking to a college senior today that was coming into biotech IT. What advice would you give them? What advice would you give them? And whoever wants to go, Bill, whoever wants to.
Yeah, I'll go. You and I had this conversation briefly. And I've given this to two of my kids, by the way. I recommend cybersecurity as kind of one of the paths inward. And the reason I do that is, the tools from a data and an analysis and a behavioral perspective, but you just learn so much that's going to then educate you on the foundation of what you're about to step into, whether it's models, whether it's data classification, whether it's data leakage, as we said, data flows like water. I think that's a great analogy. I just think cybersecurity is probably a unique career. It's self-sustaining career. And even if it's kind of like an attorney, even if you don't stay there, you find these attorneys tend to go up into other careers. It's just a great foundation for you, going forward. So I always, kind of ironically recommend cybersecurity as one of the paths inward.
Thank you. Yeah, I recommended that to my college kid, but she went to data science. So she said she didn't want the pressure. I don't want the pressure. I don't want all that on.
There is pressure. That's true.
And I have one in college and a couple to follow. And it's interesting. When I talk about this, I'm like, biotech is changing to tech bio. If you think about it, the whole technology from an IT AI perspective is becoming so much more part of the R&D effort that even if you want to go into hardcore science, make sure you get that technology component. Because even if you look at Moderna and others, they're using the computational power so much to actually get to create the therapies we all depend on, that I think there's an interesting segue there, that if you go down the technology route, you can actually end up in the science route. It's not where in the past you have to choose left or right. It's more of an integrated offering now. And then me, Steve, I always want them to take a business approach first and technology second, because I think that's the way how we are all successful on this call.
Just as a side note, I used to get pinged, right, a ton for security roles, Bill Pierce. It's all about, everybody's pinging me about data roles, all sorts of data, anything, data management, data architecture, data governance, whatever. Anyway, that's just a sidebar for everybody. Anybody else want to take a shot at what they would tell a college senior?
I actually have three, two in college, one that graduated. So actually, I have one kid who married a guy who is in cybersecurity. And so that's been interesting to watch. He's working in a company now. She is actually working more on the data side, and she has a degree in computer science, and my youngest is studying computer science. Honestly, if I were advising a kid getting into healthcare IT, I would tell them to try and sit in as many meetings with other departments as possible, because pharmaceuticals are so complicated. There's so many touch points with IT, FDA, SEC, you name it. So I'd actually advise them to try to get as much experience with other departments as possible, and then get back into IT to learn how to complement what the business is doing.
Solve business problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Steve, I would say, for me, it's actually not about focusing on a specific discipline, whether it's cybersecurity or, learning about market access or patient access. For me, it's about just being curious and being inquisitive. I think what is the field of choice and the field of relevance today is going to be very different 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And I think if you impart skills to individuals that can sort of transcend time, let's say, I think that for me is more important. So just how do you remain curious? How do you remain inquisitive? And as Simon Sinek always says, start with the why. I think for me, those are like the skills that I would want to impart on a senior.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I agree with that. Curiosity, the spirit of curiosity. Do whatever you love doing, but be curious. At the end of the day, all these are tools. Next year, what's it going to be? It's going to be something different.
Yeah, I would say the similar thing. The cybersecurity, if you want to have a potential career that isn't just with biotech IT, I mean, cybersecurity has applicability across all kinds of industries. And at the same time, the data piece, I mean, AI is causing a focus back on data. I mean, there was a time, I'm going back a ways here, but before the big data warehouses were around, before all the big analytic tools were around, where there was a lot of focus on data, a lot of focus on building things the right way. You had constraints with your databases, you had constraints with your data analytic tools, and over time, both of those have improved. And so there's a lot more flexibility now. And I think that with the way that AI is being looked at across the biotech continuum, that there is now a new focus on data. But the key piece in all of this is to be always interested in the new thing, to be always curious, because the systems and processes and the conversations I'm having across the business departments and with the business partners is very different than even it was 5 or 10 years ago, and is even more different than it was 20 years ago. And that is because the evolution never stops. And if you really have to be someone who is eager to be in a continual learning mode. And truthfully, not everybody is, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for these kinds of roles in an organization, you really need to have that desire.
You got to stay curious to stay relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, Stephen, in the past, I'll simplify this a little bit. These kids, they come out of school, they don't have any real world experience, green, if you will. I've recommended to some people to just don't be afraid to take that first job in a client service area, because it gives you exposure to all the technologies within the organization and all the business units that are within it. So they can reach out through that area. That's like the seed, and build their career through that, through the exposure. Find what they like to do.
I tell anybody who's going into technology, you better like change, because it's going to be constant for the rest of your career if you want to make a career out of it. So you
Isn't that what makes it fun, though?
better
I
like
mean,
to
I feel
learn,
like
you better like change, right?
Right. We're always learning. Exactly. It's so much fun that way. There's always something new, or some business thing or technical thing. I don't know. That's why I like pharmaceuticals, but it is an interesting field.
Ganesh, anything? You and I have talked about our kids quite a bit.
Yeah, no, they've all been saying pretty much what you and I have talked. But I think at some point of time, you've got to focus. And I see cybersecurity. So if you're looking at it from a job perspective, growth perspective, cybersecurity it is, because you're never going to be out of job. And you got to be objective at some point, right? But again, to really be in the cybersecurity world, are you that technically augmented? Do you have that interest? And then I think to a great extent, and I keep telling my team, as people in IT, at any given point of time, customer service and taking responsibility is something that each one of us needs to have interest in. If you do not have the interest to take responsibility, because business will not take it, it is up to IT. And if you don't have that interest, then IT is not the place for you. So I think it is a combination of a lot of things. And as James pointed out, it could start off with customer service, trying to understand. At the end of the day, IT is a back office kind of role. So customer service is very important. Maybe you learn that way. So there's no right or wrong method, but at some point you've got to focus on something. And for me, I think that is cybersecurity. It used to be transformation ERP when I started working, but now it's moved to cybersecurity. Probably in another couple of years, it could probably move to AI, data, and things like that. It's always evolving. So that's something that, Steve and you and I have talked about this. I feel very strongly about cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So Ganesh, you talked about AI not taking jobs away. And I think when I started in the ERP, really getting serious in the ERP space, it was presented to me that the ERP would eliminate a lot of jobs, right? So the more things change, the more they stay the same, actually.
It increases the number of jobs, because I know in a lot of the large implementations that I've worked on, there were more IT guys now who never had a job before, right?
While I agree that I think the job pool is actually going to grow, Ganesh, I do think jobs are going to evolve, right? And I think we have to prepare for that evolution, let's say. So instead of needing more writers, you're going to need more editors, let's say, right? So I think we need to help our teams prepare for that evolution then.
Correct. And it's always been the case, right? With new technologies, the jobs have always kind of changed, evolved. They're much better, more enriched.
I think Edward spent some time talking about that on LinkedIn, how AI is going to help enhance leaders, right?
Well, and I think it is. I think it's going to make us more productive. But I think if you look at society, we're significantly more productive than we are 50 years ago. The jobs have changed. Jobs have not gone away. So if you think about, in principle, if you think about what AI does today, and I think Ethan Mollick said it really well, it makes our great people somewhat more productive, but it makes our mediocre people kind of get too good. So that goes back to the intern level. Will it get better over time? Will it make us more productive? I'm more productive. I don't think I'm significantly better. Now, hopefully in 2-3 years, AI will make us better, but it's an evolving area, and we just got to experiment and try for ourselves in our own life to keep getting better. But I see it like where we're going in our call centers and other places, we're trying to augment intelligence. So instead of saying, Stephen, you got to do this, we say, well, I would suggest this, but please use your human judgment to make sure it's the right choice. And you can see in a few years that might change. We're not ready for that yet. And I think many of us are not, but we will get there at some point, and it will be exciting when we get there. And the last thing I would say is, while we do this, because it's all digital, we can actually measure the percentage of times we get it right. So over time, we can start to forecast. We can predict which of these activities we can hand off and which ones we can't. That's how we have to think about this. So the one place where I slightly disagree, I don't think IT is a back office function anymore. I think IT is part of becoming the business and part of helping us grow the revenue in certain companies, which I love. And I think that's exciting. And that goes back to that. We have to influence the outcomes, and you can't get to certain outcomes if technology is not a core part of our offering in many companies. I'm not saying in all, but in many.
I think you nailed it, Ed. Right? I even my own staff. It's like you're the most business focused CIO. It's like you have to be. You have to talk the lingo, and you have to understand what makes business tick. And if you don't, then I think you need to again find another career, because I don't think IT will have a lot of the back office stuff's going away. Right? It's coders. Right? If you're a programmer, there's so much low code, no code, and cloud going on. If you aren't worried about adapting your skill set, you need to be.
Yeah. I can tell you that Bloomberg right now, they interview anybody. You have to program in Python for any job for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Every job. You can't program in Python. Have a good day.
Python and all.
And I think I said back office because in a lot of companies, and I'll talk about us here, we look at IT as more a reactive kind of an organization, right? Yes, it will change. It will evolve. And we've done a lot of that work in the past 3 years, right? But it's still that the business, we still involve the business. IT can't just go and do something. We still have to work with the business, make sure we front end the business. And in that sense, we will always be an enabler. We will never be the leader per se. The business will lead it. That's what I mean. And that for that to change, probably AI could be that technology that could bring that change, right? But we see that still in a lot of companies. I've seen that in my previous company. I see that here. We're trying to change it. It's a little difficult. The business still wants the first thing.
I think that a little bit, Ganesh. Having been a general manager of a business unit, I thought having a P&L would free me from being overhead, right? They're really just a different slice off the same onion. And I'll give you an example, right? There's probably nothing that your business can really do to help you, let you have some really technical enabled business to make your e-commerce take off. I've had 44% year-over-year growth in e-commerce. That's triple, quadruple what the business performance has been, right? And so there's a real chance for IT to shine there, right? Taking advantage of customer experience. So a lot of the data-driven functions and analytics, right? And saying, this is how we get closer to our customer. If, again, you're talking to the business properly about it and you frame it properly, right? Otherwise, they'll just push you off to the side, right? And say, I'll come get you when I need you, right?
I completely agree there, but I'll give an example, right? We are trying to provide more visibility to the business on their complete contracting and spend, right? Who makes it happen? IT makes it happen through analytics. But who goes and talks in front? It's the head of finance who goes and talks about the solution in front. From that standpoint, I always think that IT is an enabler who kind of partners with the business. That's where I think, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely want IT not to be a back office. I want IT right in front of the table there, right? Because we make it happen. And that's why I talked about the responsibility, because the responsibility is more taken by IT than the business to make things happen. But again, it's a mindset.
Absolutely.
And there are certain companies that still have that old mindset. And it's people like us that have to change that mindset and say that, no, IT is not back office. We are part of the what you call the people who make things happen, right?
Maybe we can start by rebranding IT. When I was CIO, I renamed the department to Business Systems Group. We're not called IT. That way we sat at the table, like marketing, like HR, like everyone else, and we solved business problems. IT should be renamed to something else.
Yeah, totally agree, because that was such a big thing that we did here. We call it the Information Systems Organization. We don't call it IT because earlier for us, the business thought about us as a laptop and a network organization. When we went and talked to them about business process, they said, no, what are you talking about? You are just laptop and networks. Just help me get on the internet and give me my laptop.
and fix my Apple phone. I'm trying to rebuild it.
Rebranding, right? Rebranding.
Rebranding.
And
All right. Folks, listen.
Stephen, how many technology committees do you see formed, Stephen? Are you seeing technology committees on boards? Are you being asked to recruit for technology committee leaders on boards now? You must be seeing that, right?
Not yet, no.
Oh, okay,
No.
That's interesting. I think it's coming.
Yeah.
I do. I really think it's going to start becoming front and center.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah.
Well, listen, each and every single one of you, I have to thank you. You're all awesome. Happy holidays. This was great. I'm going to see you all again, hopefully on another podcast. But all your input was great, and I appreciate every minute that each and every single one of you gave us. And my Biotech Bytes community is going to love this. Thank you.